good stuff. That's what it is. So we are, today we are in Ezekiel. So you might take a minute to turn there. I need to make sure and let you know that I am not having a lesson next week. On it's Mother's Day weekend, and my husband and I will be traveling to Parker to see my mom, and our families are gathering, and we're going to go to church with our family there, so we're not going to be here next Sunday. It's been a long time since I've missed a Sunday. I think it's been over, it might be close to 2 years since I've missed a Sunday. So I feel bad about counseling, but Robert will be here, and he will be doing his class at the 11 o'clock hour, and he's in Romans. So
are you going to continue doing the 8 o'clocks?
I have been, because there's been an interest in it. So as long as there's an interest, I will. I do it at 8 o'clock and at 11. So either way. So do you prefer, what time do you prefer? Are you an early?
We're trying the 8 o'clock.
You see what you think? Yeah. It's kind of nice to beat the heat, yeah. And I know like Joan and Vern and some of them like to come to this one because, and like Nicole, because they're teaching or doing things at 11 o'clock, and so it lets them participate. So
I just saw her. He sees he's going to be a little late.
Yeah, he's always a little late in, and then and Joan will come down probably. So, but anyway, we'll get started. We are in Ezekiel, and we're starting this is our first Sunday in Ezekiel. And so we're going to learn a little bit about Ezekiel himself. And we did a chronological study from Genesis through Revelation. In other words, we did it from Genesis to Revelation, but in terms of time, like when things happen, so we could kind of get the historical events aligned. And we learned a lot from that. But after we got done with the Revelation, I asked, well, what do we want to do next? And everyone had a real interest in going back and re-looking at the prophecy. Because when we looked at the prophecy as we came through the first time, it looked different than after we did Revelation. And it's like, okay, now that we've done Revelation, we want to go back and look at some of those prophecies. So we are not doing every verse of the prophets. What we're doing is we're looking at the prophecies that are in the prophets, so we're doing portions of it. So like Isaiah, which had a lot of chapters, Jeremiah and Lamentations, we just did the portion that included the key prophetic events. So we've done Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Daniel. And now today we start on Ezekiel. If you remember, Isaiah was the thundering prophet. Do you remember what Isaiah's message was? Remember, it was a dramatic form, like a stage, like the judge came in, and then the witnesses came in, and the attorneys testified, and they were talking about the guilt of Israel and how they had sinned and gone against God, right? Mm-hmm. And he was the thundering prophet. He was telling them there was going to be judgment. And do you remember the specific long-term prophecy we found in Isaiah? Anybody remember the name of the king? Cyrus. That Cyrus is going to send them back. There were a lot of specific prophecies there, but that was one that was a key one that we remember. Hey, Vern. Then we did Jeremiah, and we didn't actually do Lamentations, although Jeremiah wrote Lamentations also. But you remember Jeremiah was the weeping prophet, the reluctant prophet. He didn't really want to be a prophet. He tried to tell God he would rather just remain being a priest, because he was both a priest and a prophet. And so he was the weeping prophet. He was very sincere, but nobody would listen to him. And do you remember what happened to Jeremiah? In the end, what happened to Jeremiah? Do you remember?
He got thrown in a well.
He did. That wasn't quite at the end. He got out of that well. And he kept telling the people, you're supposed to give up and go with this Babylonian king. That's what God is telling you. You're supposed to go with him, go into captivity.
He went with them.
And did they go into did all of them go into captivity of Babylon? No. He stayed with the remnant that refused to go in. Even though he told them, God wants us to go with the Babylonian king. But Jeremiah himself, the priest side of him, wanted to stay with the people and try to do all that he could. Because they refused, the remnant, there were 3 times that the people were taken. The first time was in 605, then was in 597, and then was in 588. In 605, a bunch of them were taken. And that includes that first set of exiles, that was in 605. In 597, there was a second group that was taken. And then in 588 was the siege on Jerusalem. The remnant is there holding the fort. For 2 years they were under siege. If we had read all of Lamentations, we would have heard about the starving children, and they were eating each other, and it was terrible. For 2 years it was terrible. And finally they escaped through the sewerway, the waterway, and ran to Egypt and died somewhere in Egypt. And Jeremiah during that time told them, we're not supposed to do this. We're supposed to just go into captivity. But they didn't, and that was their end. So that was Jeremiah in Lamentations. He was the weeping prophet. Now Daniel then came along. Remember Daniel, if we look at the time of Daniel, we can see that he was taken. The first record we have in Daniel is of 605. So he was one of the first exiles taken. Daniel was in 605. And how old was he? Like 10 to 14 years old. Yeah, he was young. They called him a young man. And in that time, that would have been somewhere between 10 to 14 years old in 605. The first time the exiles were taken, Daniel was one of those that was taken. So when we read Daniel, by the time we got to the end, Daniel was in his 80s, right? Somewhere in his late 80s or mid 80s, somewhere like that. And so we saw like his life, when we read Daniel, we saw how he worked with the kings and he had his visions and he had specific prophecy that he also saw. So during this time then we have Ezekiel. Now Ezekiel is the weird prophet. And he's weird because God called him to do a bunch of street theater. He did a bunch of like weird acts to show the people what was going to happen. So if you think about it, how did God try to reach his people? He tried to reach them with the noble Isaiah, with the dramatic form, the prophecies, educated Isaiah who preached wonderfully to them and worked with the people. Isaiah was very noble and did a lot of writing and really tried to warn them and told them exactly what to do. Turn away from your sin. You're not turning away from your sin. You're going to be punished. You need to just go with them. Go with them to Babylon. Be taken in this captivity. And remember, they said, marry, have kids, do well, prosper in the land that you're going, because God has deemed that you're going to be going here. Remember, that was Isaiah's message. Jeremiah said, give up, give up, give up. Go, go, go. Because by the time Jeremiah came, they were still holding on. They wouldn't let go. They wouldn't go with them. And so Jeremiah was that plea, and he was the weeping prophet. So sad. So here you have Isaiah, who was thundering. You have Jeremiah, who was so compassionate and weeping and mourning. I mean, you couldn't try any opposite ones, right? And now you've got the weird one. Ezekiel's the weird one. And he is street theater. He does all these. God has him have 13 visions. And in his 13 visions, he does these really weird acts. We're going to read about his weirdness today. It's really fun.
But it might be that he did this and this one here because we're like children. And if we're going to act like children, he's going to treat us as children.
Well, I think God did everything he could to tell his people what they were supposed to do in this time. Not unlike us. Are we like that?
Yeah.
Has God told us what we're supposed to be doing in this time?
Yes?
Yeah, but we don't do it.
I learned it the hard way.
Well, Vern, God's going to send you Isaiah. He's going to send you Jeremiah, and he's going to send you Ezekiel. Now, don't tell me what you think I am. I don't want to be your Ezekiel. Okay, so Ezekiel then is, he ministers from 593 to 573. So 593 would mean that we are right there when that second exile is it would have already occurred. So right after the second exile, he's been alive, but his ministry, his prophecies began. And we see when he begins to minister that he's already been taken out of the land. He's already in Babylonian captivity when he is ministering.
We're talking about
Ezekiel.
And we're right in the beginning, the first verse, right?
Yes, we are. We just started in the very first part of Ezekiel. So Ezekiel is one of the captives in the land. If we look at Ezekiel 1:1, it says, in the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day. So if you were going to write down a date, you need to write down 597. No, I think 593 would be the proper, 593.
Just a pencil, folks.
I got an eraser, 593.
This is why I go like this a lot.
So this, I think what it is in verse 1, it's actually 597, and then by verse 2, it's 593. So either way, you're getting the right gist of where it's at. So in number 1, it says, in the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day, while I was among the exiles by the Kibar River. So where is he? He's in exile in 597. Can you see that? He's in exile. So if you will look at Psalm 137, if you take a look at Psalm 137, if you don't like turning your pages, you can just wait. When I get there, I'll read it out loud for you. In 137, remember now, I've got my finger over here in Ezekiel. It says that I was among the exiles by the Kibar River. That's in Babylon. So let's look back at Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the poplars who hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They're saying, sing one of those good old Jewish peppy songs you guys used to sing. Verse 4, how can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. So we see here, these are the exiles along the Kedar River. They're sitting along the river, and what are they doing? Weeping. And what are their captors saying?
Sing.
Come on, sing us one of those good old Jewish songs. We like the sound of that thing. So,
Go ahead and sing it.
so that's where Ezekiel is when he gets called to be a prophet. So he's not a young man. He's in his middle ages probably. He's not a real young guy. And he's in captivity when he is called to be a prophet. So take a look at verse 1 again. In 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day, while I was among the exiles by the Kibar River, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim. So how long had he been in exile? The 5th year of the exile of Jehoiakim. So that's when he is beginning. We doing good?
Yes, that was the case of 592, right? So 593.
Right, so yeah, so 593, he's by the Kibar River, and yeah, 593, 592, that's close enough. There you go. Okay, so he has, in his 5th year of being in exile, he's called to be a prophet. He says, the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi. Now, who else was a priest and was called to be a prophet? Wasn't that Jeremiah? Was a priest? And did Jeremiah like being a priest or being a prophet?
Priest.
He wanted to stay a priest, right? Hi, Joan. Good to see you. We are in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 2. He says, by the Kibar River in the land of the Babylonians, there the hand of the Lord was upon him. I looked, and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. Now, wait a minute. Have we heard stuff like this before about 4 living? Okay, don't tell me if you don't think this sounds very reminiscent. In appearance, their form was that of a man, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Where have we heard this before? Their feet, their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their four sides, they had the hands of a man. All four of them had faces and wings, and their wings touched one another. Each one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. By the way, this is vision number 1 for Ezekiel. He's going to have 13 visions. And this vision number 1, we see again in Daniel. Matthew alludes to it, and we also read about these same figures in John. And each of those places, they don't have the exact same vision that Ezekiel has, but they see these same characters, these same images they see. And they describe them like we talked about last week. They describe them from their own point of view. They're slightly different, but they're describing the same thing. The same thing as if I say the voice sounded like a voice of many waters, or if I say the voice was thundering and filled the room. You know, that's the same kind of description of the same event. And that's what we see. As we read this, it sounds so much like Revelation. It's stunning. Verse 10, their faces looked like this. Each of the four had the face of a man. On the right side, each had the face of a lion, and on the left side, the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out upward. Each had 2 wings, one touching the wing of another creature on either side, and 2 wings covering its body. Each one went straight ahead. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go without turning as they went. The appearance of the living creatures was like burning coals of fire, or like torches. Fire moved back and forth among the creatures. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. The creatures sped back and forth like flashes of lightning. So we see these creatures, but these creatures are not the vision. And when we read Revelation, when we see it in the other places in the scripture, Daniel, do they ever say, now the face of the lion means this, and the bear? No. All we see is the description of the actual creature. We don't know what it means. Or maybe it means nothing. It's just what the creature looks like.
Well, it gets your attention.
It does get your attention. But we have a whole nother world that we have not seen. That we don't know and we have not seen. And that's not the world we live in. It's all around us. And every once in a while, these prophets get a glimpse of what's happening outside of what we're doing. We need to remember that there are powers and forces all around us. We are not the only ones here. We are just what we know. There are all kinds of forces and powers around us, some things that we've never seen. These appear to be some sort of creature that these prophets all saw that described the same. They were involved in different events, but these prophets all saw these creatures. Verse 15. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each creature with its 4 faces. This was the appearance and structure of the wheels. They sparkled like chrysolite, and all 4 looked alike. Each appeared to be made like a wheel intersecting a wheel. As they moved, they would go in any one of the 4 directions the creatures faced. The wheels did not turn about as the creatures went. Their rims were high and awesome, and all 4 rims were full of eyes all around. When the living creatures moved, the wheels beside them moved, and when the living creatures rose from the ground, the wheels also rose. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go, and the wheels would rise along with them, because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When the creatures moved, they also moved. When the creatures stood still, they also stood still. And when the creatures rose from the ground, the wheels rose along with them, because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Spread out above the heads of the living creatures was what looked like an expanse, sparkling like ice and awesome. Under the expanse, their wings were stretched out one toward the other, and each had 2 wings covering its body. When the creatures moved, I heard the sound of their wings like the roar of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of an army. When they stood still, they lowered their wings. Then there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads as they stood with lowered wings. Above the expanse over their heads was what looked like a throne of sapphire, and high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal. Didn't we just read about this? Yes, we did. as if full of fire, and that from there came down, he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him, like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day. So was the radiance around him. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. When I saw it, I fell face down, and I heard the voice of one speaking to me. So this was Ezekiel's welcome to the prophecy world. Let me show you what's on the other side. And we see the same thing happening. We just read about that in Daniel, about some of these same characters and what it looked like. But it was from Daniel's point of view. So these different prophets see the same thing and describe it from their point of view. Now we're in chapter 2. He said to me, Son of man, stand upon your feet, and I will speak to you. As he spoke, the Spirit came into me and raised me up to my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. He said, Son of man, I am sending you to the Israelites, to a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. They and their fathers have been in revolt against me to this very day. The people to whom I am sending you are obstinate and stubborn. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. And whether they listen or fail to listen, for they are a rebellious house, they will know that a prophet has been among them. Okay, so we know now what Ezekiel's in for, right? Isaiah had the dramatic, convincing play, right? And lots of chapters of see this, remember that, God's this people, those people. Come on, give yourself over. It was like a convincing, like a logical, come on, let's repent, move back to God, right? Then we had Jeremiah. Oh, it's terrible, everything's terrible. It's going to get worse unless you repent. It's just going to get worse, right? The weeping prophet. And now we have Ezekiel, who God says, whether they listen or don't listen, you're going to give them the message. This is the final straw. Third strike, you're out, right? Yeah. So let's see how Ezekiel responds in verse 6. And you, son of man, do not be afraid of them or their words. Do not be afraid, though briars and thorns are all around you, and you live among scorpions. Do not be afraid of what they say, or terrified by them, though they are a rebellious house. You must speak my words to them, whether they listen or fail to listen, for they are rebellious. But you, son of man, listen to what I say to you. Do not rebel like that rebellious house. Open your mouth and eat what I give you. Then I looked, and I saw a hand stretched out to me, and it was a scroll, which he unrolled before me. On both sides of it were written the words of lament and mourning and woe. Have we seen scrolls in the images that have happened in other places? Chapter 3, verse 1. And he said to me, Son of man, eat what is before you. Eat this scroll. Then go and speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat. Then he said to me, Son of man, eat the scroll I am giving you, and fill your stomach with it. So I ate it, and it tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth. Okay, let's take a look at the other scrolls. In Daniel 10, chapter 10, verses 1 through 9. You know, I'm not going to turn to it. You can make a note if you want to look at it later. I want to make sure I get here. So just so you know, the part we read about the scrolls where they had to eat the scroll was in Daniel 10, verses 1 to 9 or so. Revelation chapter 1, verses 9 to 16 was when John had the scroll and ate it. Remember when Daniel ate the scroll? It was sweet, and then it upset his stomach. Remember that? And Daniel was the one who at the end, the angel said, we're just going to need to close this up. You've had enough. Poor Daniel, when he saw what was on the other side, he fell flat on his face and couldn't eat or drink or do anything for 3 weeks. He was so just tormented by it, right? So God is showing them what's going to happen. To Ezekiel, how does the scroll taste? Sweet. Why would something be sweet and then sour?
We're eating candy like that. You start off at sweet, and then it goes to sour. So our life can be sweet, and then it can turn sour.
In this life that we know, where we're not looking at outside of this life, are there things that happen that are so great, and then at the same time things that are just so awful?
Yes.
What about the death of a loved one?
Yes.
My father died this last year. Is that sweet or sour?
Oh, it depends on how you look at it. If it's a blessing that God's taking them home, then later you start to mourn, and then it becomes.
It's both.
Yes. So
It's both. So this is this idea that when they eat the scroll, that it's in a way it's sweet, but in another way it's sour. How is our Christian life like that? What we know right now, just in how we live right now, how is it both sweet and sour?
Because we know that God has a plan for us, and we know that what He has for us is good. But we don't always do what He has for us to do. And so then that becomes bad. Because
And-
we have to suffer the consequences of what we do outside of what He does.
And that's our own sin.
Yes.
And how much more difficult is it to watch our loved ones fall into those sins, those
it
traps?
tears at you because
just-
you want so
you
much
just
for
know.
them to be closer to God, not the other way.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. You grieve for the people that you see.
But you can't tell them that. They gotta learn for themselves.
Yes.
Well, you can tell them.
Yeah.
You can make a dramatic play and try to show them how it works.
Yeah.
You can speak to them logically and nobly like Daniel did and try to help them get it. You can be weird like Ezekiel. Wait till you see what Ezekiel does. You can be weird like Ezekiel because God is going to try all different kinds of people to reach every one of us, which is the sweet part of it, that God loves us so much that He wants to reach us.
And sometimes you're not going to be the person that's going to reach them.
Sometimes
You
you're
just
not.
pray for God to send somebody that He will listen to.
So that's what we're seeing here, okay? We're seeing a third try with these great masterful, or fourth try with these great masterful prophets to reach the people. So He's going to try this way. Okay, start in verse 4. He then said to me, Son of man, go now to the house of Israel and speak my words to them. You are not being sent to a people of obscure speech and difficult language. In other words, you're not being sent to some foreign land. They should understand you just fine. But to the house of Israel, my own people, not to many peoples of obscure speech and difficult language whose words you cannot understand. Surely if I had sent you to them, they would have listened to you. But the house of Israel is not willing to listen to you because they are not willing to listen to me. For the whole house of Israel is hardened and obstinate, and I will make you as unyielding and hardened as they are. I will make your forehead like the hardest stone, harder than flint. Do not be afraid of them or terrified by them, though they are a rebellious house. And he said to me, Son of man, listen carefully and take to heart all the words I speak to you. Go now to your countrymen in exile and speak to them. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Whether they listen or fail to listen, you get it? You're going to give them this message whether they listen to you or not. You're going to give the message. That's like your last chance, right? Have you ever felt that way with your kids? I'm going to tell you this one last time, and this is the last time I'm going to say it because it's, we're at the cut point now. Yeah, this is it. Then the Spirit lifted me up, and I heard behind me a loud rumbling sound. May the glory of the Lord be praised in His dwelling place. The sound of the wings of the living creatures brushing against each other, and the sound of the wheels beside them, a loud rumbling sound. The Spirit then lifted me up and took me away, and I went in bitterness and in anger of my spirit with the strong hand of the Lord upon me. I came to the exiles who lived at Tel Abib near the Kebar River, and there, where they were living, I sat among them for 7 days, overwhelmed. At the end of 7 days, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel, so hear the word I speak and give them warning for me. When I say to a wicked man, you will surely die, and you do not warn him or speak out to dissuade him from his evil ways in order to save his life, that wicked man will die for his sin, and I will hold you accountable for his blood. Bum, 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 bum. But if you do warn the wicked man, and he does not turn from his wickedness or from his evil ways, he will die for his sin, but you will have saved yourself. Again, when a righteous man turns from his righteousness and does evil, and I put a stumbling block before him, he will die. Since you did not warn him, he will die for his sin. The righteous things he did will not be remembered, and I will hold you accountable for his blood. But if you do warn the righteous man not to sin, and he does not sin, he will surely live because he took warning, and you will be saved yourself.
Being a prophet's a pretty hard gig, huh?
The hand of the Lord was upon me there, and he said to me, get up and go out to the plain, and there I will speak to you. So I got up and went out to the plain, and the glory of the Lord was standing there. Now, when it says the glory of the Lord, there's this big talk in Ezekiel. We're going to hear this term multiple times, so I want to kind of seed this thought for a little bit. And I also want to get, if Connie's on there, start doing your research. Because she's really good at researching these details. But the glory of the Lord, when that is mentioned, when they say the glory of the Lord was there, that's the term that was used for that pillar, the cloud that was glowing with fire in it, that they followed. At night they would see the fire, and in the day they would see the cloud. And that, I never thought about this before, but when did that leave? And we actually see in one of Ezekiel's visions the glory of the Lord leaving the temple. And when I did a little bit of research on this, it appears that cloud of fire and smoke stayed with when Solomon built the temple. That pillar was above the Ark of the Covenant in the temple. So it's really interesting to me to read in Ezekiel, one of the vision coming up, that leaves the temple. It talks about the glory of the Lord. So I'm trying to do more research on that, because that makes more sense to me. I always wondered why these nations that worshiped these different idols, what kind of magic did they see in Judaism? It seemed like a lot of formality and all of that, but they were all into signs of powers and wonders and stuff. And if that glory of the Lord sign was what was with the children of Israel in their sanctuary, I could see that then being one of the reasons that Judaism was kept, even among the ones that worship the idols. They'd come and put their idols right beside the Jewish things, and they'd be Jewish and they'd be idol worshipers at the same time. And I just always wondered about that. So that's an interesting thing. Right here, it mentions it for the first time. So Connie, if you're there, look at where we have evidence of the glory of the Lord actually leaving historically the temple. I've read some things out. We're going to talk about that more. So right here when it says, so I got up and went to the plain, and the glory of the Lord was standing there like the glory I had seen by the Kedar River, and I fell face down. So is that saying that he saw that pillar of fire and smoke that represents the glory of the Lord? I don't know. Verse 24, then the Spirit came into me and raised me to my feet. He spoke to me and said, go shut yourself inside your house, and you, son of man, they will tie with ropes. You will be bound so that you cannot go out among the people. I will make your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth so that you will be silent and unable to rebuke them, though they are a rebellious house. But when I speak to you, I will open your mouth, and you shall say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Whoever will listen, let him listen, and whoever will refuse, let him refuse, for they are a rebellious house. Okay, first thing he's supposed to do, first job. Go in your house, have someone tie you up, and then you're not going to be able to speak. In your house. So what happens then if you're in your house and you can't speak and you're tied up? You starve. You go, right? Eventually somebody notices you. And what happens? Someone comes looking for you. You're not found. They hear moaning and groaning. They knock down your door and come in. What happens? Do you attract any attention?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The news reporters are there. And guess what happened? We found the prophet Ezekiel tied up in his house and gagged, and he couldn't speak. And then his tongue becomes loosened and he's able to speak. Everything Ezekiel does is weird and designed to get the attention of the people, to make them pay attention to what he has to say. So this is the first one. He's going to be tied up in his house, and they're going to just find them sometime. Chapter 4. Now, son of man, take a clay tablet, put it in front of you, and draw the city of Jerusalem on it. Okay, can you imagine that? You're going to get a brick or a piece of a clay tablet, and you're going to draw a picture of Jerusalem, the shape of Jerusalem on it. Then lay siege to it. In other words, you're going to get your little Legos, and you're going to get your little popsicle sticks or whatever, and you're going to make little siege ramps to get up to your city as if you were siege. You're going to throw little balls of...
Or if you're more dramatic, you just start chopping away at it with something.
Well, that'll happen later. You're gonna get some little balls of paper, and you'll be throwing it at this to throw like balls of fire at it. Erect siege works against it. Build a ramp up to it. There's your popsicle sticks, toothpicks, something. Set up camps against it and put battering rams around it. Then take an iron pan, place it as an iron wall between you and the city, and turn your face toward it. It will be under siege, and you shall besiege it. This will be a sign to the house of Israel. You got your clay tablet, you got your pan, you're shooting over the pan over at your city, right? That's going to get people's attention?
I would think he was crazy.
Not as much as verse 4. Then lie on your left side and put the sin of the house of Israel upon yourself. You are to bear their sin for the number of days you lie on your side. I have assigned you the same number of days as the years of their sin. So for 390 days, you will bear the sin of the house of Israel. You're going to lay on your left side for over a year. 390 days to represent the years that they were rebellious. Now, scholars are trying to figure out when do these 390 apply. They align really well. If you have a study Bible, if you look at the bottom in the script of the study Bible, it says that the 390 years may represent the period from the time of Solomon's unfaithfulness. When Solomon first went in, he was pretty faithful. But then he started allowing idols and stuff in the temple. So from Solomon's unfaithfulness to the reign of, and until the fall of Jerusalem. And then the next part, it says here in verse 6, after you have finished this, lie down again, this time on your right side, and bear the sin of the house of Judah. And so Judah had 40 years of wickedness when Manasseh was king. I remember at the end he repented, but there were 40 years when he ruled when they allowed idols and stuff in the temple. And so this represents those years that Israel was rebellious. So he laid on his left side for over a year, and then thank God he got to turn to the other side for 40 days. And that was to represent this time of rebellion. And then the whole time he's doing the street art where he's throwing little spears and stuff at his pretend city of Jerusalem. In other words, he's saying, this is what's going to happen to you. It's happened already, and it's going to happen again, and it's because of your rebelliousness. Verse 7, turn your face toward the siege of Jerusalem, and with bared arm prophesy against her. I will tie you up with ropes so that you cannot turn from one side to the other until you have finished the days of your siege. Okay, here you go. How many of you eat Ezekiel bread? Do you eat Ezekiel bread? Anybody here ever had Ezekiel bread? You get it in the freezer section. It's like a very whole grain bread, and it has Ezekiel 4:9 on it, right? Here it is. Ready? We're at Ezekiel 4:9. Take wheat and barley, beans and lentils, millet and spelt, put them in a storage jar, and use them to make bread for yourself. That's why Ezekiel bread is called Ezekiel bread, is because this is what it's made out of. You are to eat it during the 390 days you lie on your side. Now, remember, this is not a reward. So it's kind of funny to me that somebody named Ezekiel bread to make it look so scriptural. When it's the grains that Ezekiel had to eat while he laid on his side and held siege to the city of Jerusalem. It's a little odd that would be considered holy bread, right? Yeah. Now wait, this is the best part down here. You are to eat it during the 390 days you lie on your side. Weigh out 20 shekels of food to eat each day, and eat it at set times. Also measure out 1/6 of a hin of water and drink it at set times. Eat the food as you would a barley cake. Bake it in the sight of the people, using human excrement for fuel. The Lord said, in this way the people of Israel will eat defiled food among the nations where I will drive them. Now remember, when this is occurring, Ezekiel was taken in the second range. So they are all in these strange lands, right, with strange people. And he's saying they're going to have to eat stuff that they never thought they would ever eat. Let's see what Ezekiel says. Verse 14. Then I said, not so, Sovereign Lord. I have never defiled myself from my youth until now. I have never eaten anything found dead or torn by wild animals. No unclean meat has ever entered my mouth. Very well, he said. I will let you bake your bread over cow manure instead of human excrement. What's God's point?
That we will do whatever he tells us to do, even if it's not what we want to do.
And it's going to be bad.
Yes.
This exile that you're in is going to be hard times. We read in Psalm 137 when they were at the Kibar River and they were mourning the loss of all the things they've lost. And God is saying, it's going to be so bad, you're going to be using cow manure for fuel. You'll be using human excrement for fuel. When it comes to the siege of Jerusalem and the 2 years that they were under siege, they actually ate their children. It was terrible. You can read about that in Lamentations. And it was just awful, the things that they did. They became so desperate. And that's what God is saying is you're supposed to go. He told them, and he told them with Isaiah, he told them with Jeremiah, go with your captors. I have put these people into captive you. I've sent Assyria to take you. I've sent Babylon to take them. I've sent Persia. This is by my hand. Go with them. And when you go in that land, do well. Be prosperous. Do all you're supposed to do to survive and to do well. And have children, and have families, and grow. That's what God told them to do. But what did they do instead?
Just the opposite.
Just many of them just stayed right there and refused to go. And then when they went, they were sad and mourning and sitting by the Kibar River feeling sorry for themselves. They knew what they had to do and they refused to do it. Now they're going to suffer the consequence. And what did we read in Daniel? How long would the consequence last?
40 years.
70. 70 years. Remember, Daniel read the book and said,
Oh, yeah.
we got 70, it's coming up to the 70th year before Cyrus would send them back and they'd have an opportunity again. So this time was designated by God, not by man. He allowed it to happen. And so he's making sure they know they're about to have really bad times and they're supposed to do what God said to do. He already told them remember, we didn't even read all of Lamentation or Jeremiah. All of that Jeremiah Lamentation, all of that Isaiah, again and again kept saying, go into exile, do well, live well and prosper there. I'll tell you when it's time to come back. Verse 16. He then said to me, Son of man, I will cut off the supply of food in Jerusalem. The people will eat rationed food in anxiety and drink rationed water in despair. So that occurred. He was taken, Ezekiel was taken in 597 or so, and the siege on Jerusalem is 588. So you're talking about, 10 years? 10 years before the siege of Jerusalem. And then the siege on Jerusalem lasted 2 years. So for 2 years, they were hunkered down, that last group trying to stay away from being taken. For food and water will be scarce. They will be appalled at the sight of each other and will waste away because of their sin. So why is this happening? Because God is mean.
To teach us.
He's telling them very clearly that it has to do with their sin. And later on, he's going to describe the sins that he is particularly upset with. And they have to do with the people bringing the idol worship into his temple. Chapter 5, now, Son of man, take a sharp sword and use it as a barber's razor to shave your head and your beard. Now, how's that going to turn out?
Shaving your leg dry.
Yeah? Yeah, you've been a year and a half laying on the ground. You finally get up and you quit doing your siege. You got hair everywhere, right? And now you take a sword and you shave your head and you shave your beard. I think he's getting people's attention. Then take a set of scales and divide up the hair. So you're going to weigh out your hair. When the days of your siege come to an end, burn 1/3 of the hair with fire inside the city. So remember your city? You're going to take 1/3 of your hair and make a fire in your city and burn it there. Take 1/3 and strike it with the sword all around the city. So you're going to throw the hair up all over the city, strike it with the sword, and scatter 1/3 to the wind. For, Marta, remember what God said? Whether they listen or not. Because the point is, they've been told. That's God's point now. He gave them Isaiah. He gave them Jeremiah through Jeremiah and Lamentations. He gave them Daniel. All these prophets.
He's gave them many opportunities.
Many opportunities. And now Ezekiel is final notice. Whether they listen or not. Verse 3, but take a few strands of hair and tuck them away in the folds of your garment. What does that mean? So some are burned by fire in the city. Some are killed by sword around. And others are scattered to the wind. In other words, some were just like Daniel. He was scattered to the wind, right? They're scattered to the wind. What does it mean that some were tucked in the fold?
Because some of them were protected, some of them would come around.
It's a remnant.
A remnant. Again, take a few of these and throw them into the fire and burn them up. A fire will spread from there to the whole house of Israel. This is what the sovereign Lord says. This is Jerusalem, which I have set in the center of the nations, with countries all around her. Yet in her wickedness she has rebelled against my laws and decrees more than the nations and countries around her. She has rejected my laws and has not followed my decrees. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. You have been more unruly than the nations around you and have not followed my decrees or kept my laws. You have not even conformed to the standards of the nations around you. In other words, not only did you not do what I told you to do, but you weren't even as good as the nations around you. If I picked some of these other ones that weren't even godly, they did better than you.
And they were his chosen people.
This is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself am against you, Jerusalem. I will inflict punishment on you in the sight of the nations because of all your detestable idols. The detestable idols. I will do to you what I have never done before and will never do again. Therefore, in your midst, fathers will eat their children, and children will eat their fathers. That happened in the siege on Jerusalem. I will inflict punishment on you and will scatter all your survivors to the winds. Therefore, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because you have defiled my sanctuary with all your vile images and detestable practices, I myself withdraw my favor. I will not look on you with pity or spare you. 1/3 of your people will die of the plague or perish by famine inside you. 1/3 will fall by the sword outside your walls, and 1/3 I will scatter to the winds and pursue with drawn sword. Then my anger will cease, and my wrath against them will subside. I will be avenged. And when I have spent my wrath upon them, they will know that I, the Lord, have spoken in my zeal. I will make you a ruin and a reproach among the nations around you. In the sight of all who pass by, you will be a reproach and a taunt, a warning, and an object of horror to the nations around you when I inflict punishment on you in anger and in wrath and with stinging rebuke. I, the Lord, have spoken. When I shoot at you with my deadly and destructive arrows of famine, I will shoot to destroy you. I will bring more and more famine upon you and cut off your supply of food. I will send famine and wild beast against you, and they will leave you childless. Plague and bloodshed will sweep through you, and I will bring the sword against you. I, the Lord, have spoken. Bum, 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 bum. Yeah, yeah. So what does this have to do with us today? How does this relate to us now?
Aren't we doing a lot of the same things? I mean, our idols are what things we can buy. We take it, we concentrate on the house on the hill and all this stuff instead of concentrating on the Lord and what He wants us to do.
We do have a lot of people distracted. And what bothers God more, the people distracted that are in the world or the people distracted that are in His church?
The people that are in the church, He sent us here to be His
Light.
people, to
Be a
go out
light
into
to the world. We're supposed to be loving people into a saving relationship with God. Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing?
Yes.
So when we are not loving people into a saving relationship with God, when we are being hateful and spiteful and doing the same things the world is doing, but with thinking that somehow we're being more Christian or more holy, what's God's reaction?
We are unhappy. He lets us know we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. So the weight of the world comes down on us because we are not doing what His people are supposed to be doing.
And I'm also noticing that God is not reactionary. Like, it's not like, well, this happened, so boom, smack you. I remember, hope my mom isn't watching. I remember when we were kids, my mom would smack us, and that was common then. That was what everybody did. And so there were 4 girls, and if you were messing around and she was trying to talk to somebody, she'd smack you like this. Well, it got to be that if her hand twitched, we were all like thinking we were going to get smacked. And I remember one time she got really mad at me because she raised her hand up and I moved away like this, and she goes, "Why are you doing that? I don't always smack you." I said, "Oh, okay." But we expect that there's going to be an immediate result. If I sinned last night, then tomorrow I'm going to face the penalty of my sin, not necessarily with God. The potential is that the penalty of your sin may come much later in time. It may even come later generations. The penalty of your sin is more than that smack. The penalty of your sin is long lasting. And we so readily get ourselves involved in things we should not be involved in. And we act like, well, so what? I'll just drink this alcohol tonight and I'll be hungover tomorrow and I can apologize to anybody I offended and think it's over. Right?
But
That's
it
what we
doesn't
do.
work that way. Sometimes you can really hurt somebody and they carry that for the rest of their life. They never let go of it.
Well, Marta, if I just forget and I gossip a little bit today, then I'll just make sure and go back and tell them I'm sorry. Because
It doesn't always work.
it's just words.
No. But words can cut deeper than a sword.
So I miss a few Sundays because I want to go play golf instead. I'll listen to Osteen midweek instead of attending church. I won't be too involved in church. And then since I'm going to be playing golf every once in a while and listening to other preachers during the week, then it's going to be really hard for me to volunteer to help with
But how would you
Bible
feel
study or
if
children's
God-
church. I
if
can't really
God
teach a
treated us
Sunday
that
school
way?
class because, I need to miss every once in a while.
We want God to always be there. When we're asking Him for something, we think, okay, God, deliver.
We have all kinds of excuses that we don't do what God has called us to do.
Yes.
And we need to remember that sin entangles us. And no, it's not a sin to not come to church. By the way, I'm not going to be here next Sunday. It's not a sin to not come to church one Sunday. But the problem is that sin entangles us. And so the way it entangles us is it looks like something small. It looks like a little funny comment we made that's a little off, but it's just funny. It's not any big deal. They understand that I'm just joking. It looks like that. It looks like just missing Sunday because I need a little extra sleep today. I'm going to get a little extra sleep today.
But we miss
It's
out
gossiping.
on the rewards
It's
that
gossiping
God's
because
given
that person's mature enough to understand that I'm just feeling angst today. Those little things we act like are no big deal, but that's what Satan uses. And he hooks into us, and then he pulls us away. I eat too much, so then I feel guilty for having eaten too much.
Don't go there.
I know, I'm gonna go there. I feel guilty for having eaten too much, so that entangles me. And I feel insecure because I look fat. I feel that I look fat and I don't like the way I look. So then I don't feel confident enough to do God's work because I feel like I don't look as good as I should. Right? Satan will find whatever he can find, and he's going to work that, whatever you're willing to allow, and he's going to hook that, and he's going to entangle us. And that's going to trap us into doing things that we normally would not do. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? If God were right there and he could just smack us, that would help.
I don't want to be smacked.
But God says, nope, I'm not going to smack you. You know what you're supposed to do. You need to choose to do it. So unlike my mom, he's not going to give you a quick little, he's going to make you be mature enough to choose to do the right thing, to choose to ask for forgiveness, to choose to not be entangled. Because he's growing us and teaching us and helping us to learn. That's what we need to learn. If I waited for God just to smack me and then all of a sudden I have to do what he says, I'm not learning anything. I'm just being afraid of the smack. Right?
God doesn't have to smack us. Everything that we do for him is because we choose to do it. There's consequences for sin, and that's what smacks us. He doesn't have to do it.
Right.
We smack ourselves.
He allows it to happen. And it could be in 2 years, it could be in 30 years, it could be 70 years, it could be 490 years, right? It could be that sin is sin, and it works its evil over time.
That brings to mind Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff, he lived pretty good for a while, but he died in prison just the other.
Yeah, our time will come. And God has told us how to live. He's told us what to do. We need to do it. We don't need to see Ezekiel laying on the ground for 390 days eating Ezekiel bread, right? Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you will help us to be obedient followers of you, that we will listen to what your Spirit tells us, that we will listen to what you've given us in the Word, and that we will obey, that we will be obedient people who do what is right and what is good. And when we have question about what is right or what is good, that we stop and ask you, that we don't just act on our own, that we do what you would have for us to do. Thank you for teaching us and growing us and maturing us. Please help us to see what you have in front of us to do and for us to do it, no matter how small nor how big. When it's small, Lord, sometimes we act like it's not meaningful and we shouldn't worry about it. But if it's whatever it is, even a small thing, you're calling us to be disciplined and to do that thing. And Lord, when it's a large thing, we tend to be overwhelmed and think we can't do it. But it's your work. And if you want it done and you need for us to do a part, we just need to step up and do that part and let you take care of how those things work out. We love you and we're called according to your purpose. Thank you for giving us Ezekiel the weirdo to kind of show us this other side after seeing how the other prophets sent your message and your word. It's in Jesus' name that we learn this. Amen. Amen. Okay, now I've got to make sure I have the right